So we're going to 300 Fisher Street, the presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So as Kerry's transitioning out of that presentation and the EPA folk, Dan's here. Dan, you want to come on up? As we get ready to do a short slideshow, just a quick background for everybody that may be watching at home. But in the packet tonight, there was Dan's presentation, and DEP's coming up too, Pete. So there's a memo with a history of this. I tried to make it down to a couple pages. There's a very, very long history of this parcel. But the good news, and I want to just focus the discussion quickly. There's no decision by the council tonight, but as Dan and Pete are going to mention, soon there's going to be a public input, probably later this fall or in the winter. And so the EPA had recommended or requested just a little bit of time on a council agenda to help get the word out, give a little bit of history, and obviously with many of you being new to the council, just giving a little bit of a background, even for Councilor Cormier-Ledger, this may be some new information because I don't think since the pandemic there's been a tremendous amount of activity on 300 Fisher. No. Prior to the pandemic, Councilor DeLorco will remember the structure on the property was taken down, a lot of earth material was taken away, and there was actually really good progress happening. And like we say about everything with 2020, then the pandemic changed everything. So I appreciate the folks from the EPA coming out. They'll introduce themselves and give a little slideshow, and then people can ask questions about 300 Fisher. So I appreciate that. Thanks for coming here.
So my name is Dan LaFrance. I'm a remedial project manager with the EPA Superfund program. To my left is Peter Zalewskis of Mass DEP, my counterpart at the DEP, and joining remotely is Liz McCarthy, who is from the EPA Office of Public Affairs. Her role in this process is, Jim alluded, there's going to be a public involvement activity that's going to be, we're looking for feedback from the public, and so Liz is going to be largely involved in coordinating that. So my goal tonight was just to give sort of a brief update of where we are in the process and some of the kind of upcoming timeline, what you're likely to see, just so that it's not news to you when we drop a document and say, you have 30 days to issue comments. It's not the first time you hear it. So this photo on the front page was the building. The day it caught fire in 2015. It has since been taken down with slab. But I'll skip the executive summary and just get to the good stuff. So the 300 Fisher Street property is the one in orange, right against the railroad tracks, and 495 at the south end of this image. The black line is the area that EPA has been studying within that whole boundary going back over the last 10 years. And COVID definitely derailed some of the work, and we had to reset, but also PFAS is a big issue at this site. If you've heard of one environmental contaminant in the last 10 years, it's PFAS. We have it here. The science is constantly evolving. We've had to go back through multiple times and add sampling programs, add reanalysis of the data sets. As new regulations have come online, we've had to reevaluate our math and make sure that things are, that we have a good understanding of kind of where we're at. But what we've done is basically broken the site into two, what we call operable units, large phases of work. The first being the factory property itself. We're calling that operable unit 1, so it's tagged that way on the drawing. The second is the wetland system, and it's Minebrook, Beaver Pond. Spring Pond is kind of our background location. So we've studied it. There's not really anything there. It's our clean source for what flows through the site. And we're looking at how contaminants get picked up in the river as it passes the site. But so operable unit 1 is kind of the main subject right now of, we can take action. We now know enough and are able to do a feasibility study. We're almost to the point of publishing that, saying this is what we're looking to do to remedy the contamination issues here. And I have a couple of slides that will get into what those are. And then the wetland system is kind of on the receiving end of everything that starts at the factory site. So we have to address the factory site first, just to kind of cut off the bleeding and then deal with the rest of the problem. So skipping to the factory site itself, I'm not going to dwell too much on exactly what this map means, but all of those data points are lead, and you can tell from kind of the coloring here, warmer colors, higher concentrations of lead. If they're red and purple, those are levels that are above the cleanup standards that we've established for the site. The greenish and yellowish kind of colors on the left-hand side of the map are wetland areas, so you can see that there's upland and going into the wetlands, fairly high amounts of lead kind of throughout. There are a lot of other drawings in some of the files that you flip through that all kind of tell the same story, different metals, different other contaminants, but generally it's the same thing. We're seeing a lot of this getting down toward the wetlands, getting out into the wetland system and going to points downstream. The reason why there's nothing flagged in the middle of the drawing is that this is a 0 to 1 foot sample presentation here. The building slab is 1.5 feet thick. There's an area that was covered with 1 foot of clean soil. So it's that we don't have samples of contaminated material there. You go a few inches deeper, you'd find it. But bringing that on a drawing makes it even more confusing about that. So just trying to get sort of the basic sense of sort of what's going on. We also, so a lot of this came from rubber and plastics manufacturing, and they made land for themselves over time. The first industrial activity here was the 1880s. And as the factory got built out more and more, they moved further and further away from the tracks. And in order to do that, they made land out of solid waste. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of that kind of around the edges, kind of up against the wetlands. If you've ever been out there, the land is very steep, kind of right up to the wetlands and dead flat at the slab, because they built land, they put buildings on it, and where they stopped.
You can say they filled it in.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of areas where PFAS was apparently disposed in wastewater and has started migrating from the site. This is important because the town drinking water supply, one of the town's supply wells, is
right
just
there.
along 495, about 1,000 feet away. So we are very appreciative that the town is actually building a filtration plant for that. We are at some point going to need to come to some sort of understanding of just information sharing, because part of what I have to do in the long term with the site is verify whether the public is ever at risk from issues on the site. As long as that plant is operating the way we think it is, it'll probably be fine. If I have to take further actions, I need to know that. So no immediate action on that, but just something to think about. This is super fun in a single slide. It's kind of a lot to process, but for the last 10 years or so, we've been in this kind of bottom arrow, going from include the site on the national priorities list on the right. We did that in 2015. That makes it part of our docket that we investigate and develop a cleanup plan. As I said, we had to do the investigation. We had to reevaluate our findings several times because of PFAS, repeat a bunch of field exercises, do things like that. Came to, in 2024, 2025, a remedial investigation and health risk assessment that said this is what the issue really is. From there, we went into what we call a feasibility study, which goes to, these are methods we may use to be able to deal with that, and looking at what techniques are available, how can we just put up fences and throw a lock on the door and now there's no access for people and people can't be exposed. That doesn't really achieve anything. It is in theory an option, but we discarded it because of a lot of other reasons that are in the report. But once we go through that kind of exercise, we focus in on something that we decide we think is the right approach to deal with the contamination, and then we issue what we call a proposed plan, and that's what the talk bubble thing is right in the middle there. That is a public document that is for public response. And so the idea would be that the public has the opportunity to read that, to provide feedback to the EPA, say, I like this idea, I hate this idea, have you considered this other thing? And we use all that information to finalize what the plan actually needs to be. If if we came in and said we were going to, propose an incinerator and I get, vegetables thrown at me and I have to leave, running away from the room, we'll scrap the cleanup plan and propose something else. If the community is generally on board, we might finalize it more or less as is, but taking, feedback into consideration. And it's anywhere on that continuum. So a lot of words here, but this basically says a lot of the same things I just did. But the current timing is I just got a redraft of the feasibility study today. I've got to go through some internal process controls, but somewhere late summer or fall, I'll be publishing the proposed plan. So that'll be a public document. Typically, when we issue the proposed plan, there is a 30-day initial public comment period. If people want more time, we are happy to grant it, but you have to ask.
No, it's good to know.
Yeah, so, we are happy to grant that. And on top of that, because this is, a complex, dense topic and, 10 minutes here is not enough to dive into the weeds, Liz can talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that we have for kind of demystifying the process. We have ways of trying to help make it a more accessible document. But, part of the way that it works is, there's a public hearing where I can't really say anything other than thank you for your time. Next person to speak is, as you're all familiar, we are thinking about doing some sort of, more accessible, post up at a coffee shop or the library or something and, just have an informal meeting with whoever wants to show up and ask whatever questions. So Liz is going to work on trying to sort of set that up. So these are some of the things that we looked at in terms of what we are likely to be doing at the site. The high-level issues are we've got, as I showed on the earlier slide, we've got soil, high levels of metals. That's a direct contact risk if people are walking around in it. If somebody's doing utility work and trying to set utilities in it, they're down in the trench, they're breathing in dust. That's one of the major risks that's here. The soil's all shallow, it's accessible, we can excavate it. We can send it off to a landfill, we can consolidate it on site and cover it. Different activities cost different amounts. They leave different giant holes in the site that may need to be dealt with in different ways. They may present other opportunities for building a parking lot on top of the cover. And various reuse options. So we're looking at different combinations of things there. PFAS is tricky. I'm leaning in the direction of just trying to get rid of the soil-containing PFAS from the site altogether because sequestering it isn't really a proven technique at this point in the long-term scale of our program. And then finding a way to treat it on-site so that it stops seeping into the groundwater and stops getting away and stops going toward your well. But we've got a couple of different methods for looking at that that we're working through. So kind of the key things for the board to be considering, and that I'm happy to take any feedback, whether now or during the public comment period or anywhere in between. Future land use, it's privately owned. The reason we call it BJAT is that's the name of the holding company that owns the property. I don't know that they have a plan for reuse. I don't know that the town has really looked at anything to do with it. I know Jamie, the tech review folks have looked at it a lot lately, but anything that deals with the future use kind of affects how the cleanup needs to proceed. So any comments on that would be appreciated. And then anything we can do to establish eventually an understanding about the water treatment plant and the operations there, data sharing. I have an open line with DPW on that, so I don't think it's going to be an issue. But and then the last closing point is what we call technical assistance grants, and these are EPA can do one of two things. One is, and the tag is, we give you a check and you hire your own consultant to get involved in the process. I know the town has done brownfields work in the past. You probably have engineering consultants you've used. So you could hire somebody that you trust to speak to the public on matters like this so that the public feels informed, or we have a program where we can hire one of our contractors to do that as well. But I don't even have control over kind of who we get. It's luck and draw who we wind up with. I find that sometimes towns are more likely to want to use people they know. So just something to throw out there. And so I will open it up for questions.
I got one.
Sure.
Do you know if we start digging down there, how far down we have to go? Do we know that? Because I know from where I grew up, they went in and started digging up, and the further they went down, the worse the PCPs were, and they ended up just putting a rock wall. It's in Hyde Park and then the Ponce River.
Oh, yeah.
It was
That's one of ours too. No, so actually, this is, I kind of flashed ahead to this slide anyway, but this is from the forthcoming feasibility study. Basically, within that document, we've kind of narrowed this down. A lot of these areas are 4 or 5 feet deep.
Okay.
There are some areas where it does penetrate, more like 15 feet in a couple of spots. It's mostly kind of along the edge of the building, the northwest edge, where it's got the steepest drop to the wetlands. That whole thickness is fill. But yeah, a lot of it's 4 or 5 feet.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just remember, because I'm on that committee, and then, the further they went down, the worse it got, and they haven't even got into the real bad part, as you know. But
Next thing is the river. We're working on that. But no, this one is a lot more kind of shallower superficial contamination. It's really sort of ends at the elevation of the wetlands, and it was just they built on top of the wetland block and built their way out.
okay, good. No, that was just a question I had. Anybody else?
So is this in the Zone 2 area for the well?
It is, yes, and that's our concern, is that it's part of that aquifer that the town well draws from. So we need to basically figure out a way to eliminate PFAS in the groundwater. You want to speak?
Yeah. Doug Martin, Town Franklin Water and Sewer Superintendent. Like he said, it is within our Zone 2. Those wells are currently offline. They've been offline since end of last summer for the upgrade of our Hayward water treatment plant. And that plant, once it goes back online, will have a PFAS filtration capability where we'll have that vessels in there, so we'll be producing water with zero PFAS.
So did you test the water and find that the contaminants from the site are in the water?
I don't think that we've targeted that it's totally coming from that site. So our testing prior to even, I think even you guys, EPA, looking at PFAS at the site per se, never went over or triggered anything from the state level, state or federal level at the time that we needed to do treatment. But we did, obviously, the samples did come back and we did find some there. And it's like you said too, we're proximity to 495 where those wells are. I wasn't too surprised from that. But that was kind of, a driver as well as the other filtration that we needed to do at that site to kind of, make the push to add PFAS filtration as well.
Yeah, and I understand about PFAS, but my question is more about the specific contaminants that are at the site outside of PFAS, right, metals. Was the water tested for those as well to determine if any of the ones that you're seeing at the site in that contamination had made it into the groundwater?
Yeah, I can take the first cut on that. So we do have some localized areas, and they generally overlap with some of these, purple and red hatches in here, where we have metals in groundwater slightly above the drinking water standard. But metals in a wetland system, particularly lead in a wetland system, when it gets exposed to air, it falls out. So it doesn't have the ability to migrate the 1,200 feet to wind up in the well. There is lead in in soil. It's a natural mineral component of soil, so it's kind of everywhere. But we haven't seen large-scale bulk migration of any of the metals. And a lot of what we're proposing to do would remove the sources from the wetlands, potentially do some on-site stabilization treatment that would prevent any of these from ever dissolving again. So we are looking at ways to further bring those levels down, but we're not as concerned about migration from that. But to Doug's point, they've never tripped the PFAS MCLs at the drinking water plant, but the levels that we have on site are significantly higher with some of the same compounds detected at both ends. So our interpretation is that there's some component of it that we've got to stop what we are contributing, whether that's the whole problem or not. There are a lot of sources of PFAS. There's a site in New Hampshire where it literally rained down from the air from an industrial use 10 miles away. We've seen things like that all over the place. So I can't say that it's everything, but we are looking at how we control what we know that we can control within our program.
And I'll just add too, from a heavy metal perspective, none of our testing has ever tripped any MCLs or SMCLs from a water quality standpoint.
Okay. Any concern that the work you do to mitigate the situation, clean it up, might make it worse?
So one of the things that we have to look at in the feasibility study is the short-term impacts and whether some of those things could happen. We're not going to select a remedy that we think is likely to have major negative impacts in the short term. And the idea is that once we clean up and finish up and are done, we're restoring wetlands. We're putting the landforms back together in a way that are physically stable. So we're trying really to select a remedy that doesn't do that. There certainly are ones, when we start getting into chemical treatment in the groundwater, there are ways to break down PFAS, but they involve a lot of heat and very low pH to turn your groundwater acidic. We don't want to do that. There are a lot of different technologies that start to get into those, you could be doing more harm than good things. And so that's why the feasibility study takes as long as it does, is we have to start looking at all of those conditions in totality. I think what we're going to come away with is really unlikely to have those kind of knock-on effects beyond the end of the project.
Last question. Are you looking for the council to eventually approve a plan that you recommend?
So, some sort of community support would be appreciated. One of the last two, so when we do our process, there are a couple of what we call balancing criteria for selecting a remedy. And two of the final ones that we don't get any insight into until we publish the plan are state acceptance, which I should be. Pete and I get along, so I shouldn't be blowing him away with what I propose. And then community acceptance. And as I said, we've had sites where we propose an incinerator and we get chased out of the room. If the community is in support of the remedy, that helps us to finalize a remedy. If you don't like it, say so. It doesn't help anyone for you to smile and nod and actually dislike what we're doing. But honest feedback. But if you do support it, we would appreciate hearing that. Further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my first question is regards to, there was a thing in the memo about housing versus commercial use, and that housing would require more cleanup than commercial. And I just wanted to get some clarification on that. If the council wanted housing, would there be any more cost to the town? Or I know there'd be cost to you probably, and like diminishing returns. So I just wanted to get some clarification as to future use of the project and how that impacts your cleanup.
It's a good question. So we did look at whether or not housing might be viable as a use for the site, and this is more just we kind of default to the assumptions of the site was industrial, it's zoned industrial, it's kind of locked off by the railroad tracks, and I understand there were some interesting covenants written into the railroad land transfer that you can't actually build a road across it or anything like that. So it's a tough parcel to actually set up for housing. If you can get enough housing in there and the numbers work and things like that, we're not opposed to it. But in terms of does it require more cleanup, the answer is typically yes. The reason being, in simple terms, I have gardens at my house. This time of year, I am, digging things up by hand every single day. If that's contaminated soil, I'm breathing that in. I'm getting exposed to that. Whereas something like an office building, you might park in the parking lot and walk over, soil that's buried underneath asphalt, and there's a lot less contact there. So it's a less sensitive use, and so we can be a little bit more relaxed in how much we clean up, because there are other ways to manage the rest of the exposure that go along with it. So yes, if it is residential, we would have to do more cleanup, but the reality is that there's a lot to do here either way, and I wouldn't say that is a reason to write off housing. It was just when we met with Tech Review, we talked about that a little bit, and just the amount of available space, the amount of wetlands in the area, the slopes, the access issues, things like that. It just wasn't on its face a very easy place to stick a lot of homes. So if you can only get 5 or 6 homes in there, it's a lot of money to do that. But if it could be a major housing development, yeah, we're not opposed.
Okay. And the other question I had was, in terms of the federal government's support of the Superfund program, is there anything, has their support been stable, or has it been a little jumpy?
So in 2021, there was a law passed called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and one of the items in that bill was the reinstatement of the Superfund tax. So in the past, Superfund has, for the last 25, 30 years, been mostly supported by appropriations. Now we actually have tax revenue again. The name Superfund is there's a trust that was capitalized by a tax on the specialty chemicals industry. That went away for a long time. Now it's back. So we have a stable source of funding. We have to share it with the national program. So it's not all going to my projects and I can do whatever I want with it. But it is a relatively stable source of money.
And finally, I'd just like to thank all of you for this collaboration. We have federal, state, and local all sitting at the same table. So I just want to acknowledge that it's kind of the Marble federalism approach, but I'm glad to see it working. So thank you.
Thank you.
During the public comment period, what are you looking for during that period, I guess? How to use the property? What's the intent of the public comment period?
So sometimes we'll get comments from the guy who lived in the neighborhood for the first 50 years of his life and remembers the factory and says, have you looked at this pipe that goes off someplace that we've never been able to find on the map?
Okay.
If that guy's out there, we'd love to hear from him. We're looking at, anything that people want to say about, reuse of the property and kind of how that might factor into what the cleanup is. Just a reaction to cleanup. If we're coming in and saying we want to consolidate soil on the site because it's, presents certain reuse opportunities and it's compatible with, a lot of different uses, there are some people who react to that as, you're leaving contaminants on the site. I don't like that idea. Here's what I think you should do about it. That's feedback we need to hear. So
Can I
really
jump in here too? Sorry, also to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm the woman who's the floating head online. My name is Liz. I'm the community involvement coordinator for this site. I am newish to this site, but that's okay because I have experience with 30 other Superfund sites throughout New England. To answer your question for the public comment period, it can literally be anything. It can be anything at all, really, kind of like Dan was saying, anecdotal histories about it, things that residents might be more akin to that we in our office in Boston aren't necessarily because we don't live in the community. It can be, as he said, expressing support or concerns for any parts that we have laid out. The cool thing about the public comment period, as you might know as well, is that EPA is required to provide a responsiveness summary that literally addresses every single comment.
Okay. But in that process, Dan, are you putting forth a recommendation, i.e. we're going to keep some contaminants, we're going to cap it? Is that,
Yeah.
before you even release it, are you making what I call a straw model? You're saying this is what we're proposing to do right now. Well, you don't know the future use is, which is it's kind of like the cart before the horse. Are you proposing, putting that forth, saying, oh, we're going to just cap the site with four yards of dirt or something? Is that what you're putting for? And then you're getting comment off of that?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the idea behind the proposed plan, is we would come
Okay.
forward and say, on the basis of our feasibility study, which is going to be posted on our website, and on the basis of our remedial investigation, our health risk assessments and all that are posted, and that's where demystifying this process comes in. There's a lot for people to sort out with that. But the proposed plan is, on the basis of all that information, we believe that the best path forward is to do this.
Okay.
And then we open it up for the community to say, we actually disagree, we think you should do this other thing, or we support this, or if, we want to see the property used this way, is this compatible? And I can say, yes, it is, or no, if that's really the direction we want to go, we'd have to do something different. Whatever that kind of give and take is. But yeah, we put forward our position that, this is what we think is the best answer. And then we take feedback from the public saying, well, we agree or we don't, or, some combination.
Okay. One other point you brought up is that this is privately owned land right now.
It is.
So if we in the community comes out and says, let's make it a recreational space, I think it was even pointed out, it's on this net trail, you turn into parking lots, yada, yada, yada. What's to say that the current owner says, I don't want to do that? I want to turn it into housing. I want to put a 400 unit complex in there. I mean, the fact that it's private, how do we govern what's going to end up there?
Well, so you still have, all of your usual tools. It's zoned for certain uses.
Correct, yes.
You've got the ability to say, this is what you can and can't do with it.
Right.
So I threw recreational on there as something that, is for people to imagine a little bit bigger than what it is now.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, what we want to do is develop a remedy that is potentially flexible. We put together a record of decision that says this is what we're going to do. Once we get the design, we can tweak that. Like that is a relatively bare bones document as far as, it doesn't get into the full final design of a remedy. It's not us saying, okay, this is absolutely it, this is the last thing that we're doing. It's now we start design toward, whatever that goal is. And there's like often a year or more of design work to do. So there's time to work something out, but getting people thinking of it before we say this is how we're going to generally approach it is where it's helpful. And the property owner can comment too. If he wants to call me up and tell me I'm insane for even thinking that he would ever, do something with the property, like that's his business as well.
And actually, that was going to be my last question, is how much has the property owner been involved in this whole process at this point? Been hands-off or?
I mean, he takes my calls. He's been working on, fencing and signage and trying to keep the site secure.
Okay.
But I don't think there's any real immediate plan from him. I certainly haven't heard anything that, they're drawing up plans right now and they're going to be in for review next month or anything like that. So.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm going to kind of piggyback off of them. So basically, cleaning up can look one way if it's going to stay commercial, and it would look another way if we're going residential. My concern is this: if the input and the private owner decides we're going to keep commercial and we do this type of a cleanup, and 10 years from now they decide they want to sell that property and ask the town for a rezone to do private, like housing, whether it's a single family or two, it can't be done now legally because it's not cleaned up for residential. And then we got to go through the process of they're going to be required to doing test soils and stuff like that. And it's going to end up wreaking more havoc in the long run. So why wouldn't it just be cleaned up to cover all areas, because otherwise, if we're doing it on a commercial basis, then there's gonna have to be something that is put down legally that it can never be rezoned commercial without X, Y, Z being done, because it's not fully uncontaminated. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. And, a couple of thoughts. First is that, any cleanup that we do here is likely to end up with what we call land use controls. These are, deed notices that are legally binding and say these are things you can and cannot do with the property. And generally, the first things to go are residential, daycare, school kind of activities. So for somebody to come in and propose a use that is, outside of those boundaries, that land use control lays out very specifically what they would have to do to get to a point where that's allowable. We do have sites where there is contamination at depth that is allowed to remain in place and residential construction on top of it with certain types of improvements that actually allow for the site to be used safely for residential use. I used the example earlier of me being in my gardens. If you bring in enough fill and you create a thick enough cover over contaminated soil, it's unlikely that a person gardening is going to run into that contaminated soil. And that is a relatively common approach for developing in contaminated areas. Inside of 128, it's hard to find uncontaminated land for residential development. Any large residential development is probably doing a lot of that kind of work. So it is possible, it just requires an understanding of kind of what that looks like. We would have to work with the developer to figure out how they're going to do it. It's going to be a cost. They're going to have to factor that into their performance, but that's not saying no to it. We can amend rods. We can go back later and do other actions on sites that we've otherwise closed the book on. We never really let go of our sites. So, if down the road it becomes more amenable to residential development, there is a way to make it happen. It's going to require a little bit of rework if that day comes. But it's a question of, do we spend an extra $20 million now on the possibility that maybe this comes down the road someday? Or do we say, we'll figure it out down the road if and when the time comes, and we can figure out kind of how to structure that. But that's kind of, those are the scale of the numbers that we're talking about is, full blanket removal, I want to say came in somewhere around 25 million. I haven't looked at the revised numbers today, but
No, which I understand that. I guess my concern is though, but I think you said if it was cleaned up based on a commercial, there would be something that stated that because of the way it was cleaned up, you could only do this. But if you want to go this way, this is what needs to be done.
yes.
So they can't just sell, the private owner can't just sell it, come to council, say I want a zone change or whatever it is, and then try to build a house on it.
Yeah, they could do that, and then they'd have to deal with me.
Okay, as long as they have to deal with someone, that's all I want to make sure it's happening, because I just don't want to see it be done one way and then something changes because zoning changes all the time, and now there's something being built and there's people being harmed.
Yep. And that's why we use a deed notice for this. It's actually, recorded with the deed and binding on any future owner.
Okay.
So if somebody tries to pull title on a property that, they're going to buy this land, they go through the whole process, that's going to get flagged in the title review, and any bank that's looking at it is going to say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You need a plan to deal with this. So that's part of our kind of
What you
protocol
do.
on that.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is actually going to be through you to the town administrator. Jamie, how does this property differ from the Superfund site on Grove Street? Is it simply a matter of Grove Street, sort of the town inherited it because it got abandoned and then we had to deal with the ramifications, but this site is,
The new style
private?
property.
New style, he's
Yeah.
talking about new style.
yeah.
I don't know if they may be somewhere linked between the waterways, but I don't believe they were linked in terms of this issue. This is a strictly identifiable site. Yeah, the town did inherit that property.
You guys saw it, maybe.
You know, you can look back on it, good decision, bad decision.
Okay.
But obviously, the progress we've made on that site is a fairly valuable asset to
Right.
the town now that we've started the remediation and we worked with the EPA and gotten a lot of grant money and contributed ARPA money. So I think they're just two separate parcels that have gone through two separate processes, if you will, even if they somehow maybe are linked through Mine Brook or something like that.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand, and I think for the public too. So with New Style, company was there forever, did a whole bunch of bad stuff, ended up not paying taxes, the town inherited it, and now has had to work with a whole bunch of agencies, a whole bunch of money
These same three
to
folks.
try to fix it.
Yeah.
But
I
this,
actually worked on that 15
but
years
this,
ago, so
but
I
this,
remember
this site, still company was there for a long time, did a whole bunch of bad stuff, right? And did a bunch of stuff that ended up contaminating the ground, made it a Superfund site, but it remains privately owned.
Correct.
So the government is involved in the cleanup process, but the town has limited purview because it's private.
Limited purview because it's private. The only real purview, I think, to maybe one of the questions earlier, is you could alter the zoning.
Zoning.
You know,
So my question to you guys, are there penalties to the landowners that caused the problem to begin with?
So the rubber company and the plastics company that were involved here have both been, they both went bankrupt decades ago and were forcibly liquidated by the state. So there is no party responsible on that kind of basis. I mentioned that there's a real estate holding company that owns the property. The only asset they have is the property, and that asset is worth negative millions based on just this finding. So on paper they're insolvent. So
Okay.
that's kind of where we get involved is
Okay.
sites that have been abandoned. We call them orphan sites. There's nobody still around that can pay for the cleanup. We don't even know where the company's assets got sold off to. We can't find anybody to hold accountable for it, but it rises to a certain level of danger to the public in terms of this is threatening the water supply and that sort of thing. So that becomes a case of the federal government as the backstop.
Okay, so the company that owns it bought it from the companies that had to dissolve and did all the damage.
That's my understanding.
yep.
The title is complicated here,
Yep.
but that's
Okay.
the gist of it.
Seems like a weird process. You'd think that if the companies dissolved that did the damage, that it wouldn't be available for sale to another company, but I guess that's out of our purview, but
This was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
A lot of things happened before.
all kinds of crazy stuff happened in the 80s, right?
There was no EPA, the EPA was not.
Yeah,
Like in the
no, I mean,
1980s.
I appreciate the fact that we even have an agency that's trying to look out for this stuff, and that it maddens me that it's now the second time that we're talking about a Superfund site that the town has to deal with, and that the EPA has to deal with companies that face no penalties whatsoever for doing these egregious things, right? It's maddening, but I appreciate all that you're doing and all that you're going to propose to us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of my questions are answered by the prior questions from the council. I guess I'm left with who pays for all the remediation?
So right now, what we've been doing is, a fund lead remedy. So this is financed out of the Hazardous Substances Trust Fund. So that was the fund that I mentioned earlier that's capitalized by a tax on the chemicals industry. So basically, the thinking behind that was that, today's chemical industry is paying a top-line revenue directly to this fund that is paying for the sins of the past.
Makes sense, yep.
So that, thus far, that's where we're going. Now, if we find out that, the rubber company ended up being sold to, Goodyear or Firestone or something like that, we do have the ability to then hold those companies potentially responsible, but at this point, we don't have any information about the assets being sold. And those names are just for, household names and reference, but.
I get it, yeah.
We've tried to look at what happened in bankruptcy, and as best we can tell, these companies got liquidated and sold for scrap.
No, that's good, and now Ted's questions kind of brought that out, because that was my first question. Well, who owns this? What do they want to do? Like, what's their role in all this? So the EPA somehow will pay. Is there a budget? If we say we want $60 million to fix it, and you guys say you'll have $3 million, I mean, how does that work?
So what we end up doing is, in the record of decision, we identify a remedy, and we've gone through in the feasibility study a cost estimating exercise. So if you ever read one of the press releases on one of these, and we issue a few over the year, you'll see EPA has committed to an $80 million remedy at such and such Superfund site. That's a number that comes straight out of the record of decision that we've selected this remedy with these components, that our cost estimate is this.
And that's after the public hearing, and you've addressed the responses from the public, and you publish a report and say, in our opinion, we think the right way to treat this site is by doing X, Y, and Z, and the cost for that is $80 million, and that's what we're going to contribute. The town or the county that's impacted might say, we want 90 or 100, but you're going to call the shot on that. The EPA is.
The payment part comes from EPA and to an extent the EP as well, and that's part of Pete's role, is to hold me honest on the cost of things, and then anything that ultimately goes to some sort of long-term maintenance, DEP picks that part of it up, and that's all directly out of the statute. So it's not, if we come in and say we're going to commit to an $80 million remedy to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And if it ends up costing $90 million, it is what it is.
Okay.
It's not that we're going to sit there and say, well, we only had $80 million, so this is
You'll complete what you're committed to do. I got it.
That's the way we operate,
Okay.
yes.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And just to be totally clear, there is a certain amount of cost sharing with the state throughout the process to keep us involved. I'm going to be seeing the plan before it goes out for public comment. That's the way the state operates. We work very well with Region 1. We're not always in lockstep, but we work well together. As far as costs go, EPA will commit to doing a cleanup to get this site into a certain amount of shape, as Dave was saying. If following that period of time, they just have completed their cleanup, needing a certain amount of groundwater monitoring, whether that's for 5, 10, 100 years afterwards, to make sure that their remedy is working, that is on the state's bill. We pay for that, not the city and not the private owner, unless we can find one.
Thank you. I'm good, Bobby. Thanks.
Any other questions? So just one question. Apologies if I missed it or just didn't hear it. But I know that the remediation plan is, you haven't made the recommendation yet. How long does remediation actually take? What would be the timing on this?
So I am assuming, based on the fact that we have a groundwater remedy, it's going to take probably about 1.5 years to design, because there's going to be some level of field work that needs to happen that will probably be next baseball season, call it. Spring to fall is the time when a lot of that field work gets done. And then, the rest of the design takes another year from there. And then it'll probably take, 6 months or so to go through procurement, hire our contractors to do it. And ideally, it's the following, construction season, which is, again, from March or April through roughly the end of the year. We can build the kinds of things that we're looking at here in roughly a year. The thing that's going to be the very, very long part to the whole thing is groundwater recovery. So we can put in, if we are putting in some sort of groundwater treatment system. It only takes, a couple of weeks to install that component, but there are two different ones that we're kind of looking at. One is extracting the water and treating it and recirculating it. I have a site that's been doing that for 30 years now and is not much closer to done than they started. So we're looking at other alternatives. One of the things that we're looking at here with PFAS is putting basically an underground wall in place of activated carbon. It's a carbon filter much the same as the town is putting in, but it catches the groundwater as it moves through and it strips the PFAS off of it. That's going to just stay in place until the groundwater source is exhausted, and that can take decades. And it requires sort of long-term monitoring to verify it, but actually building it is a matter of a couple of years.
Okay. That is a long timeline. Yeah.
It'll be even longer.
Yeah.
No, every single one of my questions was asked already.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for all you do, too, because that's a hard job, both of you guys. 'Cause I know that from the other
Thank you.
situation.
And if someone gets on the wrong side of the environment, we send them to you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you.
Doug, I think you're going to be sticking around.
Yeah.
Okay. Doug, can you just throw up the Charles River on that screen?
Yeah, can we take a 2-minute break?
Sure. Yep.
We are now producing this in collaboration with Franklin TV and Franklin Public Radio. This podcast is my public service effort for Franklin, but we can't do it alone. We can always use your help. How can you help? If you can use the information that you find here, please tell your friends and neighbors. If you don't like something here, please let me know. Through this feedback loop, we can continue to make improvements. And I thank you for listening. For additional information, please visit franklinmatters.org. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me directly at suresteve@gmail.com. The music for the intro and exit was provided by Michael Clark and the group East of Shirley. The piece is titled Ernesto Mañana, copyright Michael Clark and Tintype Tunes in 2008, and used with their permission. I hope you enjoy. By the way, you can also subscribe and listen to Franklin Matters Radio on your favorite podcast app. Search in podcasts for Franklin Matters.